Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Monday, November 23rd, 2020, and I'm one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. I noticed I spelled Phoenix incorrect in the Google Doc, but it's okay. It's all right.
I'm already
it's fine.
scrolled down past that point because I'm excited
Never
for the
would have
topic
known.
of the
Trevor
show.
never would have known. Yes, the topic of the show, though, we'll just dive right in because it's going to be a doozy, I feel like, is the Game Awards over the weekend or on Friday, sometime last week, unveiled their official nominees for the 2020 edition of the Game Awards. And me and Trevor are now going to be diving into all the nominees, all the categories, except for the esport ones. Sorry, Cameron Abbott. And dissecting who our predictions for who will win each category will be. We'll make some sort of Portillo's-esque bet on it. And it'll be all fun and dandy. We're just going to dive right in, I feel like, Trev. No time to lose.
Yeah.
The first category...
Exciting time of year.
Yeah, Trevor's going to make us take a brief pause now. One of my favorite times of years. Again, as I said before we started recording, I love award shows. Unironically, I just really find, in a very Logan way, and Trevor will laugh at this too, you know, I'm here for anything that is just like a celebration of dope shit. And that's what award shows ultimately are. And it's also a fun time to debate and, you know, have conversations like this. So I love award shows. I love the Game Awards. And so I'm excited to hop in. The first category we're going in, because I reordered them to make it more appealing for me, is going to be Best Ongoing Game. And the nominees for that are Apex Legends by Respawn, Destiny 2 from Bungie, Call of Duty Warzone from Infinity Ward, or Raven Software or Activision, Fortnite from Epic, and No Man's Sky from Hello Games. Trev, I'll throw it to you first. Who is your prediction for who will win Best Ongoing Game?
I feel like I'm trying to, since 2020 is just such a damn blur. Like Bungie has already been away from Activision for a year plus at this point, right? So this isn't like their first year broken away from the big bad Activision. So it's like
it's been longer than that.
Yeah. I still feel like it's going to be Destiny 2. I feel like
really.
I feel like at least in the game industry circles that kind of vote on this, I mean, I would say it's probably between Destiny 2 or Call of Duty. I feel like Fortnite has had its moment in the sun, and it's still probably, I mean, it's still probably to its audience the best ongoing game, and its audience is still super massive. But for the 95 outlets that are kind of making the calls on this, because actually remind me now, do the Game Awards incorporate audience voting? Crap, because that could throw in a whole big wrench. Actually, I think
if they do
do.
it's only for certain categories. I think I don't think it's for everyone.
Yeah.
Like I know, like best content creator, they probably do, and like the esport ones maybe, but I don't think for the regular ones.
I think it is like audience vote makes up like a percentage, a small
10%.
percentage of the overall. So damn it, that throws me for a loop. I'm gonna stick with Destiny 2 though. I think with Beyond Light just hitting, and especially right now, the buzz is all about the Destiny 2 raid. That everybody's really excited for, and I'm seeing a ton of people say it's like the best thing Bungie's ever done with Destiny. So and the bold move to vault like so much of the game in order to focus on the future of the game, I think is certainly something that the industry will like to, you know, hop on to and celebrate. So Destiny 2 gets my vote.
I did some quick Destiny 2, heard that. Winners are determined by a blended vote between the voting jury, 90%, and public fan voting, which accounts for 10% of the vote. So there we go.
Yeah.
But I'm going to pretty much ignore that for the entirety of my predictions. Destiny 2, I just feel like, I don't know, like, and it's definitely one where I think I'm going to say, actually, I think it's maybe between No Man's Sky and Warzone. because No Man's Sky just keeps doing. It had another big like next gen update thing as well. And No Man's Sky is also just a truly absurd story of what they've turned that world into. So like I could see that doing well among like the jury side of things. And then Warzone, I think I again, as someone who's like really fallen into it this year, I think it's just an incredible piece of gameplay. But I wonder how much of like the jury vote is willing to throw a vote for Call of Duty, right? Like I feel like there's a little bit of like Call of Duty's also been given enough accolades as well.
Yeah, that's where like even for No Man's Sky, I look at it and I'm like, I feel like a lot of the jurors are going to be like, yeah, No Man's Sky is doing some really cool stuff, but I don't really pay any attention to it. I'm not really, like I see the news stories come up, but I'm like, they haven't hopped in. Whereas I think a lot of people have still hopped into Destiny or Warzone, or even Fortnite to see kind of what they're up to.
I'm gonna stick with the horse that brought me here. I'm gonna still stick with Call of Duty Warzone wins the award for best ongoing game. That's what I'm gonna stick with. Am I confident? No, not at all. Not even a little bit. But that's what I'm going to say. For what it's worth, if you could pick one as your winner, what would you pick as your personal winner?
I mean, of those, I don't play any of them anymore.
Absolutely.
So I guess like
Destiny 2 gets it.
My personal pick would be anything but Destiny 2, just because they've driven me so far away from that game that I have zero interest. So I would give it to No Man's Sky personally, because I do like the story, the like rise from the ashes story of No Man's Sky. Even though I long said like that game sold well enough at launch, and the team is small enough that they never had to do another thing, and they were all gonna like retire as millionaires. So, but the fact that they've stuck with that game and have made it into something that it is really cool.
I think, to say nothing of the fact that, like, as someone who reviewed it back in the day for IP, like, I always thought No Man's Sky was a good game. Like, I think I gave it, like, a 7. I was like, this game is good. Like, there's obviously a lot of room for improvement, but, like, it was, I think, they nailed the atmosphere of it in terms of it being kind of like a haunting, I thought, like, a haunting atmosphere. I always called it, like, a horror game when it first launched, and I kind of, like, vibed with that, and I thought it was cool. And then, so I've always thought No Man's Sky was good. Jared Green of IP also always agreed with me that the game was never as bad as people made it out to be, but just seeing even what it's done from that is been pretty incredible. Going on to the next category here, we have best audio design. I'm just assuming they all say best. I'm just adding the best. No, it is best. Okay. Best audio design for this. This is gonna be a fun category, Trevor. We've got Doom Eternal, Half-Life, Ghost, Resident Evil 3, and The Last of Us Part 2. Trev, what are your predictions here? Oh, this is going to be a bloodbath.
Yeah, this is a tough one. Having not played it, but having heard everybody like sing praises on it, I think I want to go with Half-Life Alyx. And specifically, like, I mean, it's a VR title, so you got to imagine among its infinite praises was how immersive the audio design is, especially some of the stealthier sections of the game are completely reliant on you being able to hear and know what's going on. So yeah, I feel like that's Half-Life, is spoilers for the end of this episode in the Game of the Year conversation. A lot of people are saying it got snubbed and in not getting a nod there. So I think one of the places where it did get a nod here, I think it'll get celebrated. Like I say that, and then I look at Ghost of Tsushima or I look at Last of Us Part 2, and I'm like, no, those are easily gonna take it. But I'm gonna say Half-Life Alyx, just for the heck of diversity. But like ultimately, it's probably gonna be like something like The Last of Us. It's just gonna try and clean up everything it's nominated for.
So I actually am coming at it from a different perspective. This is an interesting one. I looked at this list and was like, this is going to be one of the few spots where Doom Eternal has any chance to win anything, I feel like. Because its score and music, obviously, also very well known, but like its actual audio design is fairly incredible as well. So I'm actually going to say this is a chance for Doom Eternal to pick up an award, and that's my prediction, actually, is Doom to pretty much sweep the music awards here. And I actually don't know where I have best sound music, but like I'm just gonna might as well just do it right now because we're here.
Mm-hmm.
And so shift into best score and music. Our nominees there are again Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Hades, Ori and the Will of the Wisp, and The Last of Us Part 2.
Will o' the Wisps, Will o' the Wisps.
Will of the Wisp, yes. That makes way more sense. You're right. That's a good. I was like, that is kind of a weird. It's a weird name for. What are your predictions there?
For best score music, I mean, I wonder if nostalgia is going to take the day for Final Fantasy VII Remake here.
Yeah,
because the reimagining of that iconic score is so well realized in that game, and it's probably my personal pick, but I think Hades is like a critical darling within within the industry, and I feel like Doom Eternal. While I hear your point, I feel like there was a lot of like hubbub around launch about Doom Eternal's like audio mix, and Mick Gordon basically like saying like I disavow this. They didn't do what I wanted them to do because of time or whatever. So I'm gonna give it to Hades for this, but I personally want it to be Final Fantasy VII.
So I think this is an interesting category because there are a few categories I think where a deadlock can allow like a dark horse to win, basically.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of them where I think almost genuinely all 5 of these games could win, and I would not be surprised. Because I think it could be a thing of a few of the people split among Final Fantasy or Hades or The Last of Us or Doom, and then something like Ori, who just has a devoted fan base that loves that game and loves the music in the game, propels it enough to get to the top. I think the same is true for almost any of the other games. My thing is actually, I almost have the inverse of you, where I think Final Fantasy VII Remake actually will win it over Doom, for that exact reason. I think people are just going to love Final Fantasy VII Remake for the nostalgia of it.
And they've had 23 years to enjoy that music, and it just got better in this version.
Yeah, and so I think that's actually going to get the win. I think, again, like I said, this is one of the most competitive categories. I think indies games could win it, but I'm going to go with Final Fantasy VII Remake. And then... I'm going to stick... You know what? We're sticking with it. I'm sticking with it.
That's
not
fair.
doubting myself.
That's fair.
That's what I'm going to go with.
I will say, and I won't say specifically what, because you still haven't played it, but The Last of Us Part 2 does have one of my favorite musical moments of this year. So I do want to give a shout out to that, even if I don't think... I think by and large, the score and soundtrack of that game does what it did in the first game, in that like it sets a great mood, but it is something you almost forget about in the midst of like everything else that game is doing.
So I mean, as someone whose personal favorite soundtrack of all time is The Last of Us, the original one, that's part of why I am not that optimistic about its chances. Just because I think what you just said is I think it's going to be pretty similar to the first one. More refined, more elevated in certain starts, have spectacular moments that really resonate with you, like you just said. But I think for most people, it's going to be like, this is like The Last of Us Part 1, a video game that tied the record for most Game Awards won when it came out. So I think there are people who be like, well, The Last of Us, the first one, did pretty well. I don't know how much we need to kind of reward the sequel in these smaller categories.
Yeah. It always comes down to like are the jurors also going to be like, well, I'm voting for The Last of Us for Game of the Year, so I don't need to vote for it in this one. Let's spread the love around in this award. Who's actually thinking that versus who's thinking, well, no, I'm going to vote for the best soundtrack.
What I think best. Yeah. Moving on to one of my favorite categories yearly in the thing is best independent game. There it is. Best indie, Wikipedia has it as.
Yeah.
But yeah, best independent game, we've got Spitfire. Nope.
Spiritfarer.
Wow, I'm having a hard time. Yeah. Spiritfarer, Spelunky 2, Hades, Fall Guys, and
Carrion.
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 We're trying.
Yeah.
We're trying. Carry on. As our 5 nominees for best independent game. This is a good one too. Well, actually, no, it's not. I know it's going to win. Trevor, what do you think is going to win?
I think Hades is gonna win, but
Ooh, we're going to disagree.
I give my personal shout out to Spiritfarer, which I think is a beautiful game, and Hades has a ton of love elsewhere. So I would love to see Spiritfarer take it here because they're only nominated here in one other category. But yeah, I think ultimately Hades is like the critical darling among the industry. So that's what I think is going to take it. I see what you're putting in there, and I understand that. I think that one had maybe a more flash in the pan kind of moment versus Hades that I think has sustained past its initial flurry.
Maybe. And again, my pick for this year is going to be Fall Guys. And I think, to your point, I think people are going to say, I'm going to push for Hades and other categories, whereas Fall Guys isn't nominated for Game of the Year. It isn't nominated for, like, best, really a lot else other than, like, community kind of games and, like, family games kind of thing. So I think Fall Guys is going to get a push here a little bit more. And I think people want to recognize it for just how much of a moment it really was for during the summer. Mm-hmm. Plus, Fall Guys is great. I mean, it is likely to be in my top 10 list for the year. Will probably be at least an honorable mention on yours. And so I also just think it's a great video game. And so I think Fall Guys is going to kind of get...
That is the epitome of the game that didn't die a hero, so it has lived long enough to become a villain in my eyes.
Yeah, yeah. But Fall Guys is great, so I think Fall Guys is going to win. I think it's going to be a chance for people to kind of give that game its due. And so yeah, I expect Fall Guys to be the best indie game winner this year.
And it definitely seems like the kind of thing, I will kind of say it seems like the kind of thing that in a pre-show of the Game Awards, like it'll get announced and Jeff will also like debut season 3.5 or season 4 or whatever the whatever is new to announce in Fall Guys. We'll get like a spot there at the thing. So I could see that, but personally, I think Hades is just beloved by so much of the industry.
Sure. No argument there. Moving on to Content Creator of the Year. Did
we move mobile?
I moved mobile just because I've literally not played any of these games.
Okay.
So it would just be you saying what you think and me just taking a shot. Like, Among Us, I would say.
Yeah, I was gonna say Among Us would be my pick for it as well.
Clear-cut favorite, yeah. For Content Creator of the Year, this is also going to be probably not a super long conversation. I only know 2 of the people even. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say Alana Pierce is going to be the winner just because we love Alana Pierce. But shout out to Tim the Tatman, who's the only one I even know. So
yeah, so Alana Pierce, Jan Lopez, Nick Merckx, Tim the Tatman, and Valkyrie are the nominees.
I guess I know Valkyrie too.
I remember seeing Nick Merckx pop up a ton back in the brief little window where I was into Fortnite. So like I know his name and I know him, like I know he has a good community, and that was where Tim the Tatman really started to pop up on my radar too. And I think the 2 of them have probably drastically larger audiences than Alana.
I bet you they do.
But it always comes down to like, do they get activated?
They can mobilize, yeah.
To try and like push for them to. I mean, like Tim the Tatman, I think beat out Ninja at the height of Ninja's power in one of those awards because like Tim's audience really rallied behind him, and Tim had one of the going back to Fall Guys had one of those like fun moments of 2020 in that his like quest for his first crown win became like a meme in and of itself and became kind of like the conversation around the game.
That's right.
So I could see him winning it, but personally, I also would want to back Alana just as, especially given that this announcement came right after, and it actually happened while we were recording last week's episode of this show, that she announced that she's going to be going to work as a games writer for Sony's Santa Monica. So she's going to be theoretically working on the next God of War now, and her getting nominated as a content creator of the year as a swan song of her time in content creation, I think would be fun. I also think she's done a ton of great charity work this year, and using her platform for that. So yeah, Alana will get my vote as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I could easily see one of the bigger guys kind of take it.
Yeah, I agree. Moving on to the next category, one that I love yearly, is Best Art Direction. I think this is also, for the record, going to be another great category of games. Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost of Tsushima, Hades, Ori and the Will of the Wisp, nailed it, and The Last of Us Part 2. That's a hell of a list of games, honestly. Again, a little bit like Best Score in Music, I think I could conceivably see a case where any of these 5 win. I think personally, for me personally, I would pick Ghost, because as we talked about in our spoiler cast that we recorded yesterday, that went live
today,
2 days ago.
Oh, yes,
when you listen to this,
yes.
I think Ghost is just a stunningly beautiful video game. I think it's just absolutely gorgeous. So I personally would say Ghost would be my pick. When we have our own Game of the Awards, this will be a category, I'm sure, and that'll be what my vote is for. And I also think that I don't think Ghost will probably win Game of the Year or like Game Direction, any of the big kind of categories like that. And I do think there's a chance to kind of reward Ghost in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I also am going to make it my prediction for it will win as well.
Yeah, I agree. This is a murderer's row of art direction in games.
It really is.
Hades and Ori, especially, like they have such a beautiful aesthetic to their games. In their kind of in their style, and then Last of Us Part 2 and Final Fantasy VII Remake, I think, are really pushing the tech to its limit. The fact that pretty much the entirety of Final Fantasy VII is like rendered in-game kind of stuff as opposed to pre-rendered cutscenes is something that, like, since Final Fantasy X has seemed unheard of in a Final Fantasy game. Like, in Final Fantasy, I mean, even going back to, I guess, the PlayStation 1 era, it's like you have the gameplay stuff and then they put so much effort and resources into the cinematics. And the fact that, like, it all flows seamlessly is something that wowed me repeatedly throughout that game, and is one of the reasons, like, that game is a standout game for me this year. But ultimately, yeah, I think what Ghost is doing visually, and its diversity, like if Final Fantasy VII took us more outside of Midgar, which is largely like one look, I think it would have a better shot. But since Ghost has such a varied ecosystem in that game, in its visual look, visual style, I think, I think this is somewhere they can celebrate Ghost as well.
Yeah, it's just a beautiful. I mean, all these games are beautiful. One of the things I love about this is just how distinct and different each of the game's art styles is. Yeah. And I think it is such a great celebration of video games and what they're presenting in 2020. I mean, these are such a diverse series of games, visually, gameplay-wise even, that it is a great list. There's no wrong answer in that list. But yeah, my pick is Ghost. Going to Best Community Support, which I don't know, I'm not really sure how much different it is from Best Ongoing, but nonetheless, we have Apex Legends, Destiny 2, Fall Guys, Fortnite, No Man's Sky, and
Valorant.
Whatever, man. And here, I'm gonna pick. This is such a weird list of games. I'm gonna do No Man's Sky here. I think No Man's Sky is gonna be my pick, just because of how just that community's journey, and I think how much they're still putting out massive things for the community. 3-4 years later now. God, yeah, 4 years later now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my pick, is No Man's Sky.
So I feel like Destiny 2 can easily take this one. I feel like they have taken
Yep.
this award in the past. It's also interesting to note that like this is also on the heels of Deej, their longtime community manager, having just stepped away from Bungie, and I think somebody else on the community team also recently just left. So I don't know if that means like the future of Bungie and Destiny is gonna look a little different, but ultimately I gotta give this one to Fall Guys because again, like
Hell yeah.
the Twitter became a meme in and of itself
That's a great
as
point.
part of the conversation around Fall Guys. So I think I think Fall Guys gets my
That's a great point.
my
Yeah.
prediction on this one.
You make me. I almost want to call an audible. Sure, it's tempting me.
I mean, it's your show, your rules. It's not locked. I'm not locked in as far as I can tell. So
I'll keep it. I'll keep it No Man's Sky. I'll ride the horse that brought me there, I guess. But yeah, Fall Guys. It's the community managers now for Fall Guys are just fantastic across the board, and just the way it became an internet meme in and of itself. Fall Guys absolutely deserving of that win. Moving on to best family game. We have got Animal Crossing New Horizons. Spoiler alert, it's probably gonna win. Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. Fall Guys, Mario Kart Live Home Circuit. Didn't even know that was a video game. Minecraft Dungeons.
So Mario Kart
and
Live Home Circuit is the physical Mario Kart that you can set up in your house and drive it around.
And Paper Mario, the Origami King.
I mean, you gave a shirking off look. I think Mario Kart Live Home Circuit is like the coolest thing for the family to play together of these.
Sure.
But yeah, it's Animal Crossing New Horizons. Like
Animal Crossing New Horizons is going to win.
That was a juggernaut this year. It is.
Yeah.
I think it has surpassed everything except maybe Mario Kart 8 for the best-selling game on Switch, but it's like on track to easily beat Mario Kart 8 as the best-selling game on Switch. So yeah, it's Animal Crossing New Horizons.
Yeah. Even more so because Animal Crossing only has 3 nominations, and so this is such an obvious place to give it a win somewhere.
Yep.
Animal Crossing, easily my pick. Shifting to Games for Impact, we have got... There's so many categories in video games. We have If Found, Kentucky Route Zero, Spirit Fair, Tell Me Why, and Through the Darkest of Times. Trev?
So Through the Darkest of Times is the only one I don't know anything about in this.
I agree.
And I say that I don't really know anything about Kentucky Route Zero, despite having heard about it a ton. And it's one of those that's constantly like, you should play this kind of games. And it was one of those that like I held off because it was always like a piecemeal kind of game that now has like a complete edition. If Found, I dabbled with at PAX and really was unimpressed by it. In particular because of like a gameplay mechanic for how that story was told, just didn't grab me. But shout out to George Cruz Alvarez, who really loved it and sang its praises. My personal pick,
Cameron too, I think.
maybe Cameron Abbott. I don't think Cameron.
Yeah.
I don't think Cameron played it. Did he? I think he just kind of said
he
like
did.
he deferred to
George.
Spirit Fair again personally gets my pick, and for more you can read my piece on the site about
Very
it.
good piece, yeah.
But I think this is one of those kinds of categories where Don't Nod can really shine, having done the Life is Strange games, of course, in the past, and Tell Me Why, I think, fits within that mold. So I think Tell Me Why is positioned as the game of these that has certainly like is at the forefront of people's minds more than everything else, whereas everything else is like extra indie. Everything else is like off Broadway indie level, and Tell Me Why is off Broadway. Tell Me Why I think gets my pick here.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be Tell Me Why. It's also the one where, no offense to Spirit Fair, I feel like I've heard the most buzz around as well. Yeah. Which again goes back into your off Broadway versus just off Broadway. And plus Don't Nod is just great. I mean, as someone who is a massive fan of Life is Strange Season 1. I think they are a studio that is so well equipped to tell impactful, personal, emotional stories, and that seems exactly like what Tell Me Why is. I expect it to win. This is one of the ones that I am most confident about, in fact, along with Best Family Game. So I also have Tell Me Why being the predicted winner for Games for Impact. But again, want to play multiple. I want to play Spirit Fair too. Actually, I should add that to my list before I forget. But yeah, I think it will be Tell Me Why. Next up, we have innovation and accessibility in games.
New category this year.
Yes, and a great category. One that I'm super happy to see now. We have Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Grounded, Hyperdot, The Last of Us Part 2, and Watch Dogs Legion. I'm curious to see what you think will win.
So I haven't seen what Watch Dogs Legion does, and I haven't seen, what Hyperdot or Grounded do, really. I guess Grounded, I feel like, is maybe on this list because it had a whole bunch of, it made waves because they added, like, an arachnophobia mode. Because Grounded is that game where it's basically like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but a survival game. And the big bad in that game is spiders, and they came up with an arachnophobia mode to, like, mitigate people's concerns with arachnophobia. But ultimately, I think The Last of Us Part 2 made so many headlines about just the massive amount of things it was doing accessibility-wise. I do appreciate that, like, when I booted up Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the first things it takes me before I even get to, like, the new game menu is, like, here are all the accessibility settings that you can, like, explore. And in particular, I immediately was like, yes, give me the largest font possible for subtitles, to the point that sometimes it, like, comically bleeds off the screen and I can't read everything. So I'm like, well, it kind of defeats its own purpose there, but whatever. But yeah, I think Last of Us Part 2 made such a... They basically did, like, a 4-year consideration for this award before this award was even announced as a thing in kind of the pre-release launch campaign of, like, these are all the cool things that we've done to bring in people for accessibility and to really try and, like, showcase that. So yeah, Last of Us Part 2.
I think for me, my pick is also Last of Us Part 2. I think it's such a genuine continuation of what they've been doing for their games for years now anyway. They've I feel like been at the forefront for a while now in terms of accessibility in games, and just seeing all of the different accessibility features that they kind of showcase in for Last of Us Part 2, kind of around Twitter, seeing the different modes and accessibility features. It is just an incredible breadth of features for that game that I think make it easier than ever for someone to pick up and play a video game, which is something I think both of us will champion to kind of the end of time here. And in a game, I think that strives to be so serious and such an important story, and with not, like, being in a lot of ways, like, at the forefront of video game design studios, I think it's also a marker being laid down that if Naughty Dog can find time to build out a suite of accessibility features this in-depth and this robust and this, I think, rewarding for all the people who want to play the game, no studio really has a excuse to not do this, right? If they could make the time, then any other big AAA game can make the time to also kind of do this.
I mean, I would argue that, like, they made the time through crunch, and they also have a bigger budget than many other studios. So, like,
but in terms of,
like, maybe it's not a great one-to-one comparison, but yes, I definitely think the fact that they prioritized it should be a stake in the ground that everybody should be prioritizing it.
100%.
One of the, like, I don't think they could have really kind of fit it into this, but I do want to, like, also give a shout out just in general to, like, Xbox in general, like, as a platform, is really trying to get behind accessibility so much. And it, like, admittedly, they just don't have the games coming out to really, like, say, here are all the accessibility things we're trying to put in our games. So, like, in a more meta sense, I feel like Xbox or Microsoft was snubbed in this category,
Mm-hmm.
but since it is focused specifically on like the games, I do want to give a shout out to Ubisoft for having 2 games on there, and it clearly
Yeah.
being, and it's something that like even going back to the Division 2 last year, I remember there being like a bunch of accessibility options. So it's clearly something that is at the forefront of them in how they're trying to approach their game design. So yeah, shout out to that.
Absolutely. A great series of games. Next up, we have Best Role-Playing Game. And for this, I find it a bit interesting because here we have, I think, so for me at least, and I'll be curious to get your thoughts on this too, it's been a weird year for role-playing games, I think to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's reflected in the nominees that we have in the category, with it being Yakuza Like a Dragon, Wasteland 3, Persona 5 Royale, Final Fantasy VII Remake, and Genshin Impact. And that's a weird series of games that I feel like reflects this being a weird year for role-playing games in general. Like, none of them are really... I mean, Final Fantasy VII Remake, I guess to a degree, but, like, none of them are, like, giant open-world sprawling games that are new this year, right? So that Final Fantasy VII Remake and Persona 5 Royale obviously are, like, essentially remakes or expanded versions of the games already out. Yakuza Like a Dragon is, like, a weird one for me, at least, where, like, technically Yakuza is like a role-playing game, I guess, but like it's a weird one. Like, it fits in multiple genres.
I mean, Like a Dragon, by all accounts, is a departure from the action adventure side of things, and it is much more RPG. It's a turn-based RPG game.
Like a Dragon's a turn-based RPG game?
I believe so. Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, yes. Like this category list does show like the breadth of like role-playing game is just kind of a nebulous term at this point. Because you have Final Fantasy VII Remake is much more action RPG. Genshin Impact is like open world, free to play RPG. Persona 5 Royal is a very much a turn-based RPG. Wasteland 3 is like it's almost more of a tactical kind of RPG game. And then Yakuza Like a Dragon I believe is more in turn-based side of things. It is wild. Final Fantasy VII Remake and Persona 5 Royal, they do have the benefit of the other games with their name in it. But I would say like Wasteland and Yakuza also have the benefit of their respective franchises behind them. And personally, I think Final Fantasy VII Remake's going to take it here because despite all odds, that game came out phenomenally. Like everything was positioned for that to just be another like Square Enix kind of miss. And the fact that they made a game that is so reverent to the original, but does so much new stuff that it brought in, completely new audiences to it while still largely satisfying the existing audience of Final Fantasy. I think that it would personally be my pick right now for Game of the Year, but I don't think it's going to take it. So I think there's another one where like this is a place where you can celebrate that game, and like Persona 5 Royal on that side of things is the best incarnation of that game easily, but it is basically just 20 hours tacked on to the game that came out a couple years ago, versus like Final Fantasy Remake is, yes, like the bones of the story are the same as of Final Fantasy VII, but it is such a like departure in gameplay and even story from the original that I think it is doing something completely wholly new in its remake nature.
Yeah.
So yeah, Final Fantasy VII Remake gets my vote here.
Trevor sold me on it. He actually swayed me a little bit. So Final Fantasy VII Remake will get my vote as well. I was leaning actually a little bit towards Yakuza Like a Dragon just because of how much buzz that game has gotten. But no, Final Fantasy VII Remake.
It'll definitely be curious because that definitely has like the recency bias to it. and even like the next gen bias to it a little bit.
This is one too where I wonder. I could see this being one where like maybe the fan vote swaying it to Final Fantasy VII Remake as well. Like if it's actually close. But yeah, I think again, because I don't think Final Fantasy VII Remake will win for Game of the Year. This is an obvious place I think to kind of reward it for being almost shockingly fantastic. And so, yeah, I think Final Fantasy VII Remake will win for best role.
It's another one of those because the Game Awards does this so much, where it's like I could see the Game Awards orchestra doing songs from each of the games nominated, and then like the Game Award for best score and soundtrack goes to Final Fantasy VII Remake, and then and Final Fantasy VII Remake also won best role playing game, as kind of like the voiceover thing, because they tend to combine a lot of those extra awards to save time and room in the ceremony. So I could see that being like what happens here.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm very curious about that one, as I am about the next category, which you want to talk about, Murderer's Row. Going in for 2 years, this category is Best Action Adventure Game. Just Jesus. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Ghost of Tsushima, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Ori and the Will of the Wisp, Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, and The Last of Us Part 2. Just, good lord. That's an insane category of games.
Yeah, it's nice to see Jedi Fallen Order get a little bit of love here because it famously like just missed the cutoff last year. And there are some people that are arguing out there that it should have been, in consideration for the Game of the Year. I think it would have been in consideration for Game of the Year last year, against last year's nominees. But this year is just like was such
Bananas.
A juggernaut year to kind of close off this generation and even launch the next gen. So yeah, it's nice that it got the nomination here, but even among these games, it's not going to win.
No.
Like for me, it comes down to like Ori and the Will of the Wisp is a great game. It's doing its own little thing. It didn't do too much different from the original Ori.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same vein, like Spider-Man Miles Morales isn't doing too much different than 2018 Spider-Man. So like, and Assassin's Creed Valhalla is just a Norse coat of paint on Origins and Odyssey. I think it comes down to Ghost of Tsushima and Last of Us Part 2, and I think there's probably just too much buzz behind Last of Us Part 2 that I think Last of Us Part 2 like this is one of those like Last of Us Part 2 has all the potential in the world to dominate the awards, and I think this is one of those cases where it has the votes.
That's an interesting one. So I agree that it comes down to Ghost and The Last of Us Part 2. I think I'm less sure of who will win. I think I can see Ghost pulling this off and winning. I think this is tough. I think for me, I'll also give it to The Last of Us Part 2, which I think is my first time giving it an award tonight, as the winner. But I think Ghost could absolutely edge it out and ultimately beat it for best action adventure game. Especially because like, I mean, we'll get to it obviously, but like that Game of the Year, best narrative, best game direction, like final trio is just.
Yeah, I mean, like this is definitely a case where if the panel says like, yeah, we're not going to give it to Ghost for Game of the Year, but let's give them action adventure, you could see that kind of take the dominant here. And personally, again, since one of my biggest complaints about Tilo 2 was its pacing and maybe sometimes lack of action and or adventure, I certainly think Ghost of Tsushima is a more traditional action-based game versus Last of Us Part 2 that is a more linear narrative experience with some action elements in it. But yeah, I still think Last of Us just has the potential to be a juggernaut this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think in some ways this is kind of the start of it maybe doing that. And so, yeah, I think The Last of Us Part 2 is just going to win because it's probably a fantastic video game. Next category we have, I had included because I'm just so excited. Best sports/racing game. We have Dirt 5, F1 2020, NBA 2K21, FIFA 21, and the winner of this category, I think almost certain, I'd be stunned if it's not, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2. Tony Hawk's going to win. It is one of the categories I am most confident about, if only because everything else is
just like an annualized iteration kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, admittedly, so is Tony Hawk, but whatever.
Sure, but in a very similar vein to like Final Fantasy VII Remake, I think there's people who love these video games, even if it doesn't actually have the best Tony Hawk's game, which is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 3. I imagine remake for that is coming soon, but it is absolutely going to win this category. It should. Trevor, I think, said he just recently got it or was going to get it.
I played a little bit of it for the first time last night. I'm really bad at Tony Hawk Pro Skater. I've yet
there's definitely learning.
I've yet to break 30,000 points on the warehouse level. I've gotten like all of the other challenges of the warehouse level done at this point. Just not the high scores or the combo score yet.
Yeah.
Because I'm just not good at stringing combos together yet and figuring that out. But I obviously like the amount of love and care that has been put into Tony Hawk. I think definitely sets it apart from everything else in this category. And I feel like this category is almost always like, here are the usual suspects that are the nominations, and then here's the one breakout game that, defies that mold, be it like a Mario Kart or something like that, or a Rocket League.
Rocket League. You have to Rocket League every year.
And so, I think Tony Hawk Pro Skater is that game this year that differs. One of the ones I want to give a little love to our friend Kyle from 6-1 Indie, who lamented that MLB The Show didn't get a nod here, and never usually gets a nod. And I kind of pointed out to him, I was like, yeah, but you have to realize like half of the jurors of the 95 panel committee are international, and baseball isn't nearly as big internationally compared to especially FIFA and even basketball. I think makes enough waves internationally that like people pay attention to it, but baseball does not. Same with kind of like American football. So I think that it's more about that than it is about what who does is it Santa Monica? No, Sony San Diego. The amount of work that they put into MLB The Show is phenomenal. But yeah, it's just
to put
like they're the kind of like they could win a DICE award maybe, but they're not gonna win this.
I mean, what I will say is that almost yearly, like clockwork, MLB The Show is the best sports game out there. It is incredible. I mean, like, the depth to those games is astonishing. Especially as someone who loves baseball and played baseball, MLB The Show is an incredible series that if it almost routinely does not get the love it deserves, partially because it is picking a sport that isn't as kind of globally huge as FIFA, for example, or basketball, and partially because it is like a PlayStation exclusive, but MLB The Show is fantastic.
Yeah.
So absolutely, give a shot to that. Next up, we have Best Multiplayer Game. And here we have Animal Crossing New Horizons, probably, Among Us, Call of Duty Warzone, Fall Guys, and Valorant. I got it wrong again, I think.
Valorant.
I'll never get it right. As the nominees, I think this is slightly more competitive than Best Family Game, to be clear.
Mm-hmm.
To be clear, I still think it's going to be Animal Crossing New Horizons.
I think it definitely has the potential. I definitely think there are people out there that don't view Animal Crossings as a multiplayer game, and especially Nintendo multiplayer games are atrocious. And the multiplayer aspect of Animal Crossing is terrible. The argument I would make for Animal Crossing is it was a global phenomenon, especially as we went into lockdown and quarantine and stuff. But at the same time, I would say this is the one place where they're going to celebrate Among Us, being this game from 2018 that came out of nowhere in June and July of this year and just blew up like crazy. Had AOC on it. We did a whole episode talking about, the impact of her playing something like Among Us. So I think
Omar as well.
I think Among Us gets my vote as like this is where Among Us can be showcased. And then they've also announced that like Among Us is going to be announcing a new map at the awards. So if the cards align, it'll be an easy dunk for Jeff to be like, and the winner for best multiplayer is Among Us, and here's what the new map looks like.
I think if I myself were voting, I would vote for Fall Guys to win. I think Fall Guys is just fantastic, as we've talked about before. But I think Animal Crossing: New Horizons just being such a global phenomenon, in the spring and the summer, just, and again, it only having 3 nominations, and I think the 2 we've kind of gone over so far are going to be its best chances to win. One, it will win best from the game, but this 2 it being another good chance. I just think ultimately it will be the game that probably takes the award. Rounding the corner to best debut game. God help us, these are going to be fun ones to go over. We have Phasmophobia.
Mm-hmm.
Phasmophobia. I feel good about that. Roki. How would I pronounce that? Raji and Ancient Epic, Mortal Shell, and we did this before, Carrion.
Yes.
Yeah. As our best debut game. Games from Phobia Game Studio, Cold Symmetry, Nod Heads Games, Polygon Treehouse, and Kinetic Games are the studios. Because if anything, it's more of a studio award than the game award here. Trevor, who do you think will take the best debut game award?
So I haven't played any of these. I have Raji on my list of things to play because you really liked it coming out of PAX East.
My game of the show.
And Phasmophobia is a game I will never play because it is a horror game, but I will also recognize that Phasmophobia is one of those games that captured the zeitgeist, especially in the last couple of months in the streaming space. Like, people are really, getting excited and enjoying the hell out of that game and streaming the hell out of that game. So I think it has probably the most buzz behind it. Carrion, when it came out, I think had a little bit of a blip coming out. I want to say it came out on Switch and like Game Pass, and the people that liked it really, really liked it. But I think it kind of came and went and probably has fallen by the wayside compared to something like Phasmophobia. So I think Phasmophobia gets my pick as who I think will win.
Sure. I totally respect that. I'm going with Raji and Ancient Epic because I think that game truly is really quite fantastic. And I'm excited that might actually be a game I dive into. I have to do Black Ops Cold War 1974, Vigilante, whatever the dumb name is.
This is always this is always the frustrating, disappointing thing is like, I guarantee most of the outlets aren't going to have played all 5 of those games, so it is just going to be a popularity contest with no regard to actual quality of these games. So
sure, yeah, I think that's definitely true. But for me, again, Raji was my game of the show. I loved it. I was happy to see that like a few different people, a few different outlets, I know IIP among it, give it some praise as well. And so I think that is a small team. It is a super diverse team, which I also love and wanted to shout out as well. And so I think it's my pick for best debut game. And if this is their first game, I'm so excited to see what they can kind of keep building towards and doing. So that is going to be my pick for best debut game. Now we're kind of in the big 3, I think it's fair to say, of the Game Awards with best narrative, best game design, and game of the year. We're starting with best narrative first. And for that, we have the heavy hitters, again, another murder's row, of 13 Sentinels. Okay, so that's a bit, maybe the least heavy hitter. Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost, Hades, and The Last of Us. That's I think a tough one, but I think ultimately we probably will also agree on who we think will win best narrative. Who's your prediction, Trevor?
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely tough because, 13 Sentinels is the, hey, congratulations, here's the nomination, thank you for coming. Final Fantasy VII Remake takes a narrative that everybody knows and and bring something new to it and surprise people. So, like, there's an element of that is worthy of praise in and of itself.
Absolutely.
Hades is a game that managed to figure out a way to incorporate narrative into its roguelike structure in a interesting and compelling way. That like it is, I think, a landmark for that genre.
Yeah.
Ghost is it has a great narrative behind it, and as we touched on in our spoiler cast, tells its narrative, especially with its side characters, in an interesting way, in that it kind of doles out those stories throughout the game, as opposed to giving you like everything right at the gate, right out the gate. Or it's interesting in how it parses out their story alongside Jin's story,
and really thoughtful and emotional, like well-developed side stories as well, and side characters.
But ultimately, I think The Last of Us Part 2, while it's definitely not a narrative that will resonate and did resonate with a lot of people, like, angry fanboys around the world, have their qualms with it. I think the narrative it's telling is easily that game's strong suit. Narrative and characters and performances. And I think it is a game that, many people were kind of in the camp of like, we don't need a sequel. Last of Us Part 2 doesn't need a follow-up.
Yeah.
And it does a great job justifying its existence, for me at least, in that it finds an interesting way to tell a new story and a new narrative in that. And again, I can't dive into it because you haven't played it yet, but and I don't want to spoil anything, but I think the way it handles its narrative is really compelling. And again, going to like the media outlets that were talking about this game, like a few of them probably had a problem with the narrative, but I think they still could recognize what the narrative was doing and the juggernaut that it was there again. So yeah, it gets my vote here.
Yeah, I think out of the kind of big three categories of Game of the Year, game design, and narrative, this is the one that is, I feel, the most confident saying The Last of Us will win. If only because, as you kind of alluded to, the narrative is so key to The Last of Us Part 2, where some of the other games, whether it's Hades or Final Fantasy or even Ghost, it is a big part, but the gameplay itself is also so critical and key. And I think not all games pride themselves so much on their stories and their characters and the world and performance. And so for me, it is The Last of Us Part 2, I think will win here. I think it is a spot that is both an obvious spot to give The Last of Us a win, and also one that I think it ultimately is probably deserving of as well. I just think that it will win for best narrative, add to Naughty Dog's collection in that category. And then transitioning, Trevor had reminded me that I had forgotten to add it to my doc, even though I was going to still go over it, is quickly going over best performance for the year as well, where we will see a few of these games again, with Ashley Johnson as Ellie, Laura Bailey as Abby, both from The Last of Us Part 2, Logan Cunningham as Hades from Hades. Cameron did it yesterday.
Daisuke
Tsuji
as Jin Sakai.
Okay, cool. So I had it. Okay. As Jin Sakai, and then
Najee Jeter
as Miles Morales from Spider-Man Miles Morales, who I saw was also
Sam. He's Sam in the original Last of Us. Yeah.
Yep.
I realized that, discovered that when I did the D+ show 2 weeks ago about the Spider-Man 2017 animated show. Miles has like an arc in that show, and Najee Jeter is playing Miles in that show as well, and pulling him up. I was like, oh god, he was Sam in The Last of Us. Cool. I'd never pieced that together, but yeah, blind gamer Steve learned that today.
That's where I got mine as well.
On Twitter, and was tweeting about it. Yeah.
So first off, I think any of these are absolutely deserving winners. This is a great collection of performances. I would love for really any of these to win, especially for like Ghost or Miles Morales, which I think are very different kind of performances.
Ghost is very interesting because, as we touched on in our spoiler cast, you and Cam didn't experience
I have no idea what his performance is like.
I mean, you experienced like his physicality of it,
Yeah.
because it's obviously him performing the role of Jin, and then you just had a different voice dubbed over it, playing with the Japanese soundtrack. But yeah, it's interesting to like think about that in terms of like that performance was celebrated and got the nomination, but not the Japanese performance.
The Japanese one. So I would love it for it to be that because I think it's just such a different performance. But I think this, again, a little bit like Best Narrative, is one where I think it will ultimately be one of the performances from Last of Us Part 2. This, to be clear, though, is very much a category where I can see the Last of Us Part 2 vote splitting and allowing another performance, another candidate to win. And in fact, I think we're even going to disagree on which performance in the Last of Us that we'll probably nominate. I ultimately am going to say that I still think that Ashley Johnson as Ellie will win for Best Performance. But I absolutely think that another person could win. This is a weird category though, where I feel like if the Last of Us Part 2 splits like voters, I feel like none of the other three have like enough of a like block behind them necessarily either.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're all like, I think well liked but not necessarily like loved like the Last of Us ones are.
Yeah.
Which also kind of complicates it, but ultimately I think Ashley Johnson as Ellie will win for Best Performance.
Yeah, I think even with Ashley and Laura splitting the vote, I think they will split.
They're just gonna
90.
get
They will get like 45 and 45% of the votes. So like nobody else is gonna come in and take it from them. Logan Cunningham in particular in Hades stands out to me because like while the game is of course titled Hades. It's much more the story of Zagreus that you're playing, and Hades is like I would not have pegged Hades' performance as the performance I would shout out in that game. So it was a weird pull when I saw that, like when I saw him get the nomination. I mean, it's good, cool, but like Hades is very much like he is a character that just by his nature has very little growth throughout the course of the game. And the little growth he does have is like impactful and important, but it's just such a it was such a blip on my radar that I wouldn't have thought about it. Naji Jeter is great as Miles Morales. Daisuke Tsuji is great as Jin Sakai. And yeah, I do disagree with you on best performance because I think Ashley Johnson as Ellie, and again I like avoiding spoilers and diving into like the story, but Ashley Johnson's story as Ellie is only half told in this game because the other half of her story was told in the first Last of Us game, whereas Abby has a much more complete, like, full arc from beginning to finish in this self-contained experience in this game. So I think you get to see more from Laura Bailey in this game versus Ellie is playing only half of the story, if that makes sense. So yeah, Laura Bailey gets my pick here, and I think does also have to do like the extra heavy lifting of completely introducing that character and getting the audience to either get behind or loathe her in sometimes an equal measure. Whereas Ashley Johnson does have a little bit of a leg up from the first game, but yeah,
game.
I think a lot of the praise coming out of the game, especially once people could kind of talk about maybe more of Laura's character, was really like in support of Laura's character. So she gets my vote, and who I think the maybe not the 10% audience vote, because again, like angry fanboys are going to be bitchy angry fanboys. But I think from the critical response of the game, I think she has the more interesting role in the game.
Moving on to the penultimate category here, we have Best Game Design, which is very similar to Best Narrative and Game of the Year. They're all kind of the same games here. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Again, we have Ghost, we have Last of Us, we have Half-Life, and then we have Hades as well. Trevor, who do you have as predicting the winner from the Game Awards for Best Game Direction?
I mean, predicting the winner, I think, is going to be Last of Us Part 2.
Ooh, we're gonna disagree.
I personally, of these, think Ghost is doing the most interesting stuff from a game direction standpoint. I think the way the cinematography plays out in that game is chef's kiss, and it is
Absolutely.
like when I think like thinking of game direction, I'll think of something like God of War and its decision to do the one continuous shot as something that set that game apart from its wonderful combat and story and everything else. And the direction of Ghost of Tsushima, I think, really stands out as something worth celebrating in a way. Because Last of Us, as great as it is still very much what you would expect from Naughty Dog. It is certainly Naughty Dog at like the peak of their powers, but it's not doing anything drastically different than narrative first person or third person action games in the way it's telling its story. Ghost of Tsushima, I think, tells its story in incredibly profound ways, using its visual style and bringing everything together from gameplay to art design to sound design to everything that I think it. I would like to see it be Ghost, but I think it's going to be Last of Us.
So I also think that it's an mission where I think The Last of Us is maybe slightly more likely to win, but it's still not what I'm going to pick. I actually think that Ghost is absolutely up there and will be my pick for what it will win. But I think Hades could absolutely sneak in still this category as well, especially because I don't think Hades will win for Game of the Year as a little tease to a category from now. And so I think this could be like the high-profile category that it could win to give respect for Hades, just how much people love that game. And so I think Hades could absolutely win for Best Game Direction. Ultimately, I'm going to go for Ghost for all the reasons you gave. I think it is just such an incredible evolution of so many different small pieces of making a video game and telling it in a cinematic fashion. I think the camera movements, I think the way they kind of develop the side quest stories, I think the character arcs for all the different characters. I think the world just teeming and full of life. Like every small, minute detail of telling the story and creating that game, I think are just done so wonderfully by Insomniac Sucker Punch, that ultimately Ghost is going to be my pick for best game design. No bad answer there though. All of the picks are absolutely great and deserving of the win, but ultimately I think Ghost will win.
Before we dive into the big one, you have not included fighting sim and
I felt okay.
And what was the other one? Oh, you didn't include action either. Best action game.
Oh, I didn't include best action
VR AR is what I was thinking.
Oh.
But I want to give a quick little rundown of those. And admittedly, like they're not games we know. Like some best fighting.
Yeah.
Two of them are like game of the year versions of Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter. It's going to be one of those, probably Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think Mortal Kombat as well.
Best sim strategy, I think, is going to be Microsoft Flight Simulator. Because I think
it could also be Crusaders King 3, which people also loved. I'm excited to play it.
Okay. I think what Flight Simulator did with its like geolocation kind of stuff is beautiful, and that being the one game on that list I've played, it gets my vote, especially as like the sim. Like everything else is strategy, it's the sim game of that. So I think that best action. I'm guessing this is probably just like an oversight, but best action was Doom Eternal, Hades, Half-Life Alyx, Neo 2, and Streets of Rage 4. I think we agree. I think this is where Hades wins. I agree. And again, like Half-Life Alyx, like is the game I'm most interested of the list of nominees here. That I would love to play, and again, that ties into best VR AR experience. Dreams, Half-Life Alyx, Iron Man VR, Star Wars Squadrons, and Walking Dead: Saints and Sinners. Before the year is up, I'm planning on booting up my PSVR one last time. I have the the camera adapter for my PS5 so I can play it on my PS5. And I have Iron Man VR kind of in the dock that I want to sit down and play. I want to sit down and play Star Wars Squadrons, and I'm like super tempted, super close to pulling the trigger on buying an Oculus Quest 2 just so I can play Half-Life Alyx in my tiny little apartment. I think that's where Half-Life Alyx is gonna get its day is in VR.
I agree.
But I as having played Iron Man VR at PAX West last year, I'm very excited to get back into the Iron Man suit and kind of enjoy that, because I think it does a great job kind of conveying what that character should feel like. And I've heard nothing but great things about getting in the cockpit of an X-Wing or a TIE fighter in Star Wars Squadrons, and playing that in VR is the way to play that game, it sounds like. So I look forward to getting to boot those up one last time, but just wanted to hop in on some of the categories that Logan didn't see fit to include in the episode before we
one I
wrap
forgot.
up. Take us home, Logan. Also, do you want to touch on most anticipated game?
So this is a weird category. I don't know if I love the category, which is kind of why I didn't include it. A Jarrett Green classic. Yeah. He would hate this category, but we can actually talk about most anticipated game. This would be more of just like what we're actually anticipated about, and not what we think will win, because I don't care about that as much. But yeah, the most anticipated game list is Elden Ring, whenever we get that. God of War sequel. This category is Halo Infinite, Horizon Forbidden West, Resident Evil Village, and Breath of the Wild sequel are the nominees. Out of those, which one are you personally most excited for? I feel like I know the answer.
Yeah, it's probably going to be the follow-up to my favorite game of all time, God of War. So yeah, the God of War sequel. My ranking of these would be God of War sequel, Horizon Forbidden West, and then I don't care about any of the rest of them, really. Like Halo Infinite, I like out of curiosity more than anything else. And also I'm probably going to try and, like, when that game is finally coming out, I'm probably going to do like let's play through all the other Halos in the lead up to it, to try and get on board with that.
I would love to do that with you.
I notoriously not a big Breath of the Wild fan. Maybe the sequel will make some changes and improve some things on it. And then Elden Ring it's a FromSoft game, so it's probably going to be something that is just the bane of my existence.
It'll also come out in like 7 years.
And Resident Evil is like, I will dabble with a FromSoft game. I have no interest in playing a Resident Evil game. less than no interest. So Resident Evil Village doesn't really, like, honestly, like, there are probably other games that are coming out next year that I'm more interested, more anticipating than any of those. Like Ratchet and Clank, honestly, like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart would get like number 2 or number 3 on this list, behind God of War, and maybe Horizon Forbidden West over anything else on that list.
I think for me, God of War is going to take my top spot too, obviously. Even though I don't love it as much as Trevor, God of War is still fantastic. Horizon Forbidden West, in terms of games that I think are going to come out actually soon, maybe even next year. I'm not even convinced that half the games on this will come out next year. And so, I guess half. But yeah, Horizon Forbidden West, I'm very excited for. Resident Evil Village, I am very excited for, right? As someone who is such a big fan of Resident Evil 7, right? It is the game that made me love Resident Evil, that kind of made me finally really develop an appreciation for horror games. I'm very excited for that. I hope that it kind of keeps its RE7 roots and is a bit smaller scale and insulated, and doesn't kind of try to be this like over the top conspiracy and get to like, you know, mutated thing. Can just be like an actual like horror game. And so I'm very excited for that, actually. But yeah, I would also agree with the God of War sequel, even though I do not agree with what that tease was of 2021. Yeah. I think that is unlikely to happen. Would it be incredible if this time next year we were playing that video game right now? Yes, I don't know if I buy it. But yeah, that would be my. I mean,
there is an element that I would love to see, and this was something that, like, obviously Sean Layden was like vocally behind. I think either before or right after his departure, the idea that like Sony should be focusing on more bite-size experiences, that can come out more frequently as opposed to
Quicker, yeah.
taking 5 years to come up with a 30 or 40 hour experience. And Miles Morales, I think, is a great example of this. Doing a smaller experience with a 2-year turnaround. I would love to see if God of War is able to do that as well, and we get that here in 2021, which it's still 3 years from the 2018 God of War. But yeah, I also don't. I'm not like holding my breath about it hitting 2021.
Yeah.
Like especially in COVID times, like that seems like very wishful thinking to have put a 2021
especially
date
since
on
all
it.
we got was just the logo and nothing, not even like a cinematic cutscene, just the logo. I mean, I never thought that the original God of War was too long. Like, if the only era would maybe be the one where they're like the elf people, would maybe like the only era that was like a little bit too long. But I never thought that one was too long.
Yeah, no,
But, like
I
10 to 15 hour God of War game, I would be told, like, that just sounds awesome. That's what the original PS2 ones were, so it wouldn't even be that far out of the norm for God of War itself.
Yeah, I think God of War, the 2018 one, like
I mean,
has a
obviously
great
you thought
length
that
to
was
it
great.
and
Yeah.
is wonderfully paced for my money. But I think if you can do another one of those in half the time, I would much sooner be
Even
playing
better.
that and take my
Yeah.
$60 or $70 for that, and then take another $70 a couple years down the road when you want to give me the next 15 hours of that experience. I will gladly do that. So, yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
But diving into the big one, Game of the Year as Video Game Awards, we have, again, Murderer's Row and Doom, Animal Crossing New Horizons, the aforementioned Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Ghost, Hades, and The Last of Us. Trevor, who do you think will win Game of the Year at the Game Awards?
So, like, in defense of Doom Eternal, it does fill a very particular niche of game that is not seen anywhere else in the Game of the Year conversation. In its first person action shooter kind of game.
It will not.
It will not at all win. But it is like
I understand.
It
why
is
it's there.
easily one of those games that did very quickly get like forgotten and overlooked because it came out same day as Animal Crossing, that did just like dominate the conversation as we all went into quarantine. And Animal Crossing is certainly a more ongoing game that has continued adding new content throughout the year versus Doom Eternal, which did finally, admittedly, like launch the DLC expansion or whatever, and people liked it, but it didn't have like the legs of Animal Crossing. My personal pick here is Final Fantasy VII Remake. I don't think. I think it is. I think it and RPGs in general, JRPGs in general, are enough of a niche that it's not going to dominate in the way that Last of Us Part 2 probably will.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think Animal Crossing New Horizon is like a sleeper pick to win this whole category?
Do. I think
because that's what I'm leaning on.
I think. I mean, especially like Nintendo has that contingent of support at the outlets that like it doesn't have any other competition in this category. Like none of these other games are competing with Animal Crossing, whereas Last of Us and Ghost are competing against one another. Hades and maybe even like Doom Eternal or Final Fantasy VII. Like the other games, I think this is where you can have them split the vote, and nobody's really going to be taking the vote away from Animal Crossing in this. And Animal Crossing as the game of 2020, the zeitgeist game of 2020, easily the best-selling game of 2020. I think has the potential to be the dark horse winner for this year. But I still think it
is my second favorite.
I still think it's going to be Tilo 2. I think Last of Us Part 2 is going to take it, but I would not be at all surprised if Animal Crossing ends up like walking away with it. And basically the narrative in my head would be, oh, Last of Us Part 2 and Ghost and Hades split the vote, and Animal Crossing took it with, 30% compared to their 20s or something like that.
Yeah. I also ultimately agree that The Last of Us Part 2 will win. I'm very hesitant about it, actually. I think maybe slightly more than you. Like, if I had to hedge my bets, I would say, like, you know, there's only a 1-2% difference in my mind in terms of, like, the odds of The Last of Us winning it versus Animal Crossing winning it, both in terms of, I think, The Last of Us Hades in particular are going to really split the vote and get good chunks of it. And then also because Animal Crossing is, I feel like in so many ways, such a defining game of 2020, right? That feels so closely tied to this year, whereas The Last of Us Part 2 is a 2020 game, but doesn't necessarily feel in the same kind of visceral way that you immediately think of, like Animal Crossing, Quarantine, 2020. Yes.
And to kind of echo that, I do not think at all Animal Crossing is the best game of 2020.
No, I do not either.
I think on this list it is the weakest, but it is also the game I've played the most, and put the most time into, and yeah, it is the game that helped, especially in those early months as we all started like quarantining and locking ourselves down. Like, it was the game that got people through that. So yeah, it in the best game of 2020, no, but in the game of 2020, I could easily see that taking it.
Yeah. So yeah, those are our picks for all of the categories for the Game Awards award ceremony for 2020. With me and Trevor, we will tally up our results and probably have a post-game reacts podcast afterwards, and see how well we did. That's a show. We do have one.
Do you think there's real quick before we dive into shoutouts? Do you think there's going to be any big, exciting surprises at the Game Awards?
I think it's possible God of War 2 has some sort of trailer. Like, even if it's just like a 30-second tease.
You mentioned the fact that we didn't get anything on it. And the first thing that went into my mind is, like, 4 or 5 months ago, we didn't know Miles Morales even existed. Like, they showed us that, right. And it came out, and so maybe Sony is like, they announce it as like here's a reason to buy a PlayStation 5, and here's a timeline of why to buy it, and maybe it is that they're holding some of those things closer to their vest, because I think especially the beginning of last generation, the PS4 generation, they got really burned on delaying, and I think especially in this year, with everything that COVID has done, and how we've seen maybe people responding to like last minute game delays or stuff like that, I feel like they wouldn't have put 2021 on it unless either A, they knew they weren't going to hit it, but they want to stake a claim for buy a PS5 instead of an Xbox Series X this holiday season, and you'll have this game this time next year or something like that. Or they think they can hit that. They have it. It's further along than we think it is. It's further along than we know it is, and they're just being cautious about like how they're rolling out their marketing. So yeah, I could very easily see like the trailer be a Game Awards trailer. I think in like the PS5 launch trailer, there was like fine print that basically said like God of War positioned for, I think God of War and Horizon Forbidden West were both positioned second half of 2021. So I think like that's where it's positioned on their calendar, and hopefully they're able to hit that.
Yeah. So that's what I would say. The big thing I expect to see there. But otherwise, that's a show. We do have, again, one small, brief, quick, tiny, itsy-bitsy shout-out to go over real quick, which is, y'all, it happened. The dream happened. I just had to record enough podcasts about it, write enough pieces about it. We are getting a James Bond video game. And not just a James Bond video game, but maybe the perfect developer, in fact, even to do a James Bond video game in IO. Very excited about this. Totally unexpected. Had just no idea. Just opened Twitter at like 9 a.m. and saw this and was like, and I had to it was nice to know. And I tweeted this out. have multiple people tag me in their like release tweet.
I would have, but
Yeah,
I slept through it getting announced, and so the first time I saw it was that tweet from you. So I was like, well, I don't need to tag Logan in this. He already knows it's a game.
Very excited. Obviously, I love James Bond. I once wrote like 3,000 words on like if there'll ever be another James Bond game again, like 3 or 4 years ago, and what happened to that series. It is a video game series that is very important to me in terms of my like origins in games, whether it obviously is GoldenEye, but more importantly like Agent Under Fire, Nightfire, Everything or Nothing, the kind of that PS2 era, and so I'm super excited about it. I actually feel like cautiously optimistic that it's in good hands, so I'm very excited about it. Again, maybe we'll see a trailer at the Game Awards. I feel like when it's gonna come out.
I feel like that's way too soon to see something on that because they haven't even finished Hitman 3 yet. So
I don't know when we'll even see it. It might be like 2022 or 2023, but it is happening. It is real. There's some faint flicker of hope out there, and so I am excited for that. And you can expect all kinds of coverage at That Nerdy 2 to 3 years down the line, whenever the game is released. Otherwise, that's it. That's the show. Thank you. You can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite, like all of our wonderful patrons have. We appreciate and are thankful for your support every day. You keep the lights on and make shows like this and like that D+ show happen. And me and Trevor are eternally grateful for that. You can go over to, again, patreon.com/thatnerdysite. Check out all the tiers, all the goals we have. We are kind of constantly tweaking some of those as we kind of dive further into year 2 of That Nerdy. We're kind of closing out our first month now. We're doing video podcasts. You can see now. You can see our faces. We're doing Let's Plays. I have an Elgato in my cart on Amazon right now, so be excited for that. As I also play maybe some NES games and have my own reactions. So look forward to all the different things we have planned for you. We have I think, pretty fun podcast for our Patreon exclusive members this month in the works that I'm very excited to do. And so just stay forward to all the exciting things over at patreon.com/thatnerdysite. You can also support us by liking, subscribing, and sharing with your friends on podcast services and social media feeds all across the internet. Rate and review us on iTunes. It really does help. And it means the world to us and kind of spreading the world about the show and all of the various That Nerdy products. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor over at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trev, anything you want to plug?
I want to plug Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. The day after this episode goes live, if you're listening to it, when it goes live, or hope you had a happy Thanksgiving. More importantly, a safe Thanksgiving. Here, especially in the States. That's where we celebrate Thanksgiving. If you're like one of our overseas listeners, thank you for listening. We hope you had a nice Thursday, I guess. But yeah, I've been getting updates throughout the podcast. My family, even though my family is all local, we're not getting together for the holiday. But I did get word today that my sister picked up all the makings for Thanksgiving dinner, so she's gonna cook everything, and then basically like the meal is going to be doled out to the family.
I love that.
My mom's gonna make deliveries that day, so I will have a good Thanksgiving meal coming my way this week, despite everything. So shout out to that, and then also as kind of an echo of everything Logan was shouting out there. Keep an eye out for all of our upcoming year-end game of the year, end of the generation kind of content that we're going to be doing. Last year we we had I want to say like 20 different articles go up across the team on both game of the year stuff as well as for last year, like games of the decade kind of stuff. This time around, we as we are entering the PS5 and the Xbox Series X generation, it seems fitting to do a send-off of games of last generation. So we will be celebrating some of that. And then, as Logan alluded to, I think we have a fun topic that may make its way onto the site in list form as well, but a fun topic
I think
for
so.
a Patreon early access episode that, yeah, I'll keep close to the vest in case something falls through and we don't actually sit down and record it. But yeah, some good stuff coming up. So support on Patreon.
Yeah. You can go find myself over at Lefty Logie or Logie all across the internet. I will echo Trevor's sentiments. I'm very excited for Game of the Year and very excited for Game of the Generation discussions this coming December and January. Excited to play and talk about all the different games from the past few years. Stay forward, also a big one for me, to this weekend when we will be doing Trevor will be doing a little 12-hour, most likely 10, 12-hour long Extra Life stream for all of the wonderful kids over at Extra Life. He'll be playing through Demon Souls. As I've said on this podcast and others, I will be in the chat the whole time, cheering him on, maybe buying him a pizza. Who knows what will happen, but it should be a good time all around. I expect to have a lot of fun. As said, I will also echo it. Be safe for Thanksgiving as well. I know that, again, for all of our American listeners, the urge is to see your family, but try to be safe as much as you can. Don't do anything that will put you or anybody, any of your loved ones at risk. But yes, focus on the good times. Just have a nice, chill, relaxing Saturday as me and Trevor slowly lose our minds watching Demon Souls together. It'll be beautiful and poetic. And so look forward to that for your Thanksgiving week. Look forward to the rest of the shows that will be rolling out. And until next time, play your games and be good to each other.